Hello everyone and welcome. It's Kelly of the Forgotten South, and today I have a very special tour for you of an incredibly historic property just outside of Durham, North Carolina. The property that I'm at right now is known as Horton Grove, and it's part of what was at one time a very large and expansive plantation here in Durham, North Carolina. The building that we're looking at right now is actually the first building, or at least the oldest building that's still standing on site. This one is thought to have been built in the pre-Revolutionary War days, so very, very old 1700s era cabin. This thing is very small and very modest. It would have been home to William Horton and his family. They were the first that we know of to farm here, or first white settlers that we know to farm here. They were subsistence farmers, which means that they just kind of farmed whatever they needed to maintain themselves. This was before like large-scale farming had come to this area. So they lived here in the pre-Revolutionary days. This was their house in the 1700s. In 1823, a prominent family named the Cameron family would buy this property, including 410 acres that it sat on. So the area became known as Horton Grove after the family that lived in this small house. But the story would quickly shift because the Cameron family was definitely into large-scale plantation farming, and they would come to own or enslave many people here on this property. So that's kind of what I want to talk to you guys about next, and why this property is so special and so incredible. These cabins you'll see here, right here, and that one, and that one. These 4 cabins or homes were actually homes for enslaved people here on this property. They're very special and very unique because for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're all 2 stories. Number 2, they have interesting windows, big brick chimneys. They're very well made for this style of cabin. They're raised up on stone, as you can see. And one of the interesting things to think about is that all of this, every single part of this material that was used for these, would have been made or harvested here on site. So this wood, all of the bricks and the stone. So these homes for enslaved persons were definitely unique at the time. And there's a couple of reasons why that might have been. Number one, of course, that a plantation owner would want to protect his investment, and building a nicer home like this would potentially protect from disease and hygiene issues that would have been common in the time. Also, abolitionism in this era was starting to kind of pop up, and a white slave owner might want to seem benevolent and might want to seem as though he was justifying that he treated his slaves well by building a nice big building like this. Regardless, we do know that these buildings were not only designed but also built by highly, highly crafted enslaved people that lived here. The craftsmanship is just incredible. These were started in 1850 and completed in 1851. So the interesting thing is, down in the center there is a wide 4-foot hall, and then 4 rooms down below and 4 rooms up top. And so each of these buildings would have housed about 4 families. So they had their own room, like a big wide room that they'd have. But a family might have consisted of anywhere from 3 to 7 and sometimes even 8 people that would live in one of the rooms. So the outside here is made in the board and batten style. And it's thought or estimated that 100,000 bricks were made here on site by enslaved craftsmen to build these buildings. So the outside is all wood, but the inside is brick. Now, of the chimneys of the 4 remaining cabins that are like this, only one of them has not been rebuilt. This is the original one from the 1850s, which is pretty incredible. And some interesting things to think about. As I mentioned, these would have all been made by enslaved persons on this property, and you'll notice some really interesting things here and there. Of course, these people were not able to read or write. They were not allowed to be taught to do so. But there were little things that they could leave behind about themselves that if you look closely you might notice. Like here, it looks like a fingerprint. And then on some bricks over here, you can see this outline here where someone picked up a brick while it was still wet with their hands. And closely, I don't know if the light is good enough, but if you can see right here on this one, those are thought to be the toe prints of a young child or a baby. So I'm going to step back so that you guys can get a better idea of how massive this brick chimney is. So I won't be able to take you inside on this tour, but if you would like to see the inside, there's two ways to do that. You can either come to Stagville and take a tour with their tour guides, or you can check out my pages for photos of the inside that I took earlier today. So there are 4 of these cabins standing here. They're very unique. They're the only of their kind still standing in the state of North Carolina. So that makes these very, very significant historically. They're just impressive. See, you can kind of look down this alley and see them all the way down. So like I said, there was 4 of them. And the 4th one now looks like this. So I told you this is part of a larger plantation complex named Stagville that included a couple of different very prominent family homes and large plantation operations. By the end of the Civil War, there was 900 people, around 900 people that were enslaved here on these properties. And this section that we're at right now at Horton Grove is where the farming center was. Where I'm standing, there's a gentle rise in the hill, and at the time, the trees weren't as thick as they are now, and you could actually see from this property all the way down to the Stagville property. So pretty expansive plantation and lots of property. At the end of the Civil War, all of a sudden there was 900 people who lived on this property who were free but had nowhere to go and no money to get there. So most of them stayed here on this property, and the sharecropping era across the South began. Sharecropping was essentially where the freed families would sign a contract with a previous plantation owner saying that they would have to work a certain amount of time and a certain amount of days, and then they would get a portion of whatever they made, meaning the crops. They wouldn't make any money, so the idea that they'd ever have the ability to raise money to buy their own land was something that was said was, a lot of lip service was given to, but the likelihood of them ever being able to do it in this system was very, very small. So the contract, the historic Stagville property actually has the contract that the freed people signed with Paul Cameron, who was the previous plantation owner here, that said that they would get 1/3 of all crops, but he limited if they could sell it or who they could sell those crops to if they wanted to. And of course, most of those crops went to them feeding themselves, right? So this was the 4th of those cabins for enslaved people. When the sharecropping era started, most of the families stayed in the houses where they lived. This house actually ended up being the house that a family lived in the longest into the 1940s or 50s, I believe. Someone lived in this home. So this home was eventually updated with electricity inside. There are light bulbs and things like that. And then this additional cabin cottage to the rear that was added. And then the porch on the front too. I believe the last family to live here was the Hart family. So of all the enslaved people that lived here, most of them, like I said, stayed during the sharecropping era. A lot of them that were able to leave were the founding families of the surrounding communities in Durham and Raleigh. There's an interesting legend too about the faith systems that the enslaved people here practiced. The slave owner, Paul Cameron, had brought a white Episcopal minister here on property. But there's a story from the descendants of people that were enslaved here that at midnight they would all steal away off into the woods to a cabin where they could pray together at midnight. I think about this story a lot because they surely must have been risking a lot to do that. But it surely meant a lot to them also to have a sense of community. There was a lot of communal cooking and teaching that went on here. A lot of that was passed down from the African traditions. And I just think about somebody leaving from one of these places over here, coming down this trail, off to some cabin in the woods, in the same ground that I'm walking down today. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty incredible. Look at how beautiful this property is. Surely those people walked the same path, although it probably looked different then. Sadly, there hasn't been a verified cemetery yet that's been made or been found about where the enslaved persons here might have been buried. But hopefully one day researchers will be able to locate that so we can memorialize these people in a fashion that's a little bit better than what we have already. This woods is just beautiful, y'all. If you ever get the chance and you're in the Durham area, there's quite a few very well-maintained historic sites that give great tours and have lots of information. And it's great because they're not far from a town, so I know a lot of people aren't as interested as wandering out in the middle of nowhere, but here, you don't have to come that far from Durham. I appreciate you all joining me today. If you have any questions, please let me know down below. I'd be happy to answer them. And please check in for the 2 other parts of this tour. Thanks, y'all.